The Atlantic is a strange grave. It has no headstones, no dates carved in stone, no sound of prayer. It holds its dead in motion. The tide is their shroud, the current their lullaby. Beneath those shifting waters, hundreds of steel bodies rest in silence, German U-boats that once roamed the sea like predators and then vanished into myth. When the war began in 1939, few outside the Navy believed that submarines would decide the fate of nations. To the German High Command, surface fleets were the pride of the Reich. Battleships were power made visible, but Admiral Karl Dönitz, a quiet man with a strategist's patience, saw something else. He believed in invisibility. A single submarine, he said, could do the work of a whole squadron if it struck unseen. The sea was too vast to be ruled by surface ships. It must be stalked from below. The young men who volunteered for this new kind of war were barely out of school. They dreamed of adventure, of glory, of returning home as heroes. The propaganda films showed smiling sailors standing on gleaming decks, waving to crowds as the band played. They did not show the cramped bunks, the sweat that never dried, the air thick with diesel fumes. They did not show the faces of men listening to depth charges falling like distant footsteps of God. The early months were a revelation. Britain depended on the ocean for survival. Every tank, every shell, every loaf of bread crossed the Atlantic in merchant ships. The U-boats cut those arteries one by one. Convoys burned against the night horizon. Radio reports called it Die Glückliche, Zeit, the happy time. In Berlin, Dönitz smiled at his maps. The wolf packs were hunting well. Life on board was another reality. The crew worked in shifts so tight that two men often shared the same bunk, sleeping in turns. Bread molded after a week, water tasted of rust. Privacy was a memory. Each man carried a single thought. If we stay silent, we live. The sea listened to every vibration. A dropped wrench could betray them. The pressure hull became a prison of discipline and superstition. Some men touched the same valve for luck before every dive. Others whispered a prayer to the metal itself. They spent weeks submerged, following the faint hum of propellers through hydrophones. The navigator's face was always pale. He saw no daylight. The cook fought to keep food from spoiling. The engineer checked gauges until his eyes burned. The commander alone remained composed, the only voice that could turn panic into obedience. At 200 meters, the hull sang under strain, a low groan like breath through broken ribs. They called it the Song of the Sea. When they surfaced at night to charge batteries, the world felt unreal. The sky was a black desert of stars. The cold wind smelled of life again. Men smoked in silence. Some wrote letters they could never send. The commander paced the deck, listening to static on the radio, waiting for coded orders that might send them toward glory or death. Then came 1943. The hunters began to die faster than they could be built. Allied radar eyes saw through clouds. Sonar mapped the unseen. The wolf packs turned into prey. A single escort ship could scatter an entire formation. The sea that once protected them now betrayed them with echoes. Depth charges rained like thunder. Boats were crushed, imploded, erased. Each time a U-boat failed to report, Berlin marked it for missed missing. Families received no explanation, only silence. Mothers kept tables set for sons who would never return. Children were told their fathers were on long patrol. Silence became the Reich's last uniform. After the surrender, Dönitz ordered Operation Regenbogen Rainbow. The name sounded hopeful, but it meant self-destruction. Crews were told to scuttle their submarines rather than hand them to the enemy. Dozens obeyed without hesitation. They opened the vents, flooded the compartments, and waited. Some sang. Others wrote in their logbooks until the ink blurred. When the last air pocket collapsed, the Atlantic accepted its new children. The Allies searched but never found them all. Some wrecks were discovered by chance, others remained ghosts. Rumors grew boats that escaped to South America, to Antarctica, carrying gold or secrets. None of it mattered to the sea. It kept its own truth. Decades later, sonar explorers began to map the deep. What they found defied imagination. Submarines lying intact as if parked by invisible hands. Periscopes still raised, torpedo tubes sealed, a spoon still resting beside a rusted cup. At such depths, time itself slows. The steel corrodes but never disappears. The outlines remain like fossils of human arrogance. Diving there is like entering another century. The light fades to green, then black. A beam from the submersible reveals shapes that make the heart stutter. A control panel frozen mid-use, an officer's cap drifting in silt. No one touches anything. To move too close is to feel watched. Divers speak of pressure that seems emotional as much as physical, a presence that fills the silence. Marine biologists call these wrecks artificial reefs. Coral wraps around the conning towers. Fish dart through broken hatches. Life grows where death settled. The ocean recycles everything, even war. Yet when cameras return to the surface, the images seem unreal, too orderly, too peaceful. Perhaps the sea edits its own memory. In some places, fishermen still speak of sonar pings that echo when no ships are near. They say the ghost fleet answers in code. Scientists call it temperature layers or shifting currents. The sailors just shake their heads. They've heard those sounds before, in the war their fathers told them about. The dead, they say, still patrol their routes. Every artifact raised from the deep carries weight. A watch stopped at the moment of implosion. A compass pointing forever north. A logbook sealed in oilskin, its last line half a sentence. Surface when? Nothing more. The rest was swallowed. There is no monument big enough for them. No cemetery can hold the Atlantic. Memorials stand on land, but the real remembrance lies beneath. The coordinates are not shared. Divers call them holy ground. They descend quietly, leave a plaque or a flower weighted with stone, then rise again through the darkness. When you stand on a cliff above the sea, it looks empty. But below, a city sleeps, a city of steel and silence. The tide moves through its streets, slow as breath. Crabs crawl across periscopes, eels coil in torpedo tubes. The war continues in whispers of salt and current. History books count victories, the sea counts only echoes. Every sound fades, but the pressure remains. The Atlantic does not forgive, but it remembers. And in its memory, the ghosts of the U-boats drift forever between light and darkness, neither lost nor found, only waiting. When the war ended, the ocean did not return what it had taken. The surrender came with parades and photographs on land, but the Atlantic stayed quiet, rolling its grey waves over hundreds of sealed tombs. For most of Germany, the U-boats were ghosts best forgotten. The men who had served in them came home gaunt and hollow-eyed, some to ruins, some to nothing. They did not speak much. Their memories belonged to pressure and darkness. In the first years of peace, fishermen began to find traces of the vanished fleet. A net would tear on something deep below. Oil would rise like black blood to the surface. Sometimes the catch came up tangled with rusted metal or bits of equipment, stenciled with numbers the sea had half erased. They brought them ashore and left them near the docks. No one wanted them. The past smelled too much like fuel and salt. Allied navies organized missions to locate and clear the wrecks that might still be dangerous. Mines, torpedoes, chemical drums. What the Germans had left behind could still kill. The British called it Operation Deadlight. Over 100 surrendered submarines were towed into the open sea and deliberately sunk. The idea was simple: erase them from the world, end the story. But the sea did not erase, it stored. Decades later, those same wrecks would reappear on sonar, lying in neat rows like soldiers still waiting for orders. Underwater cameras showed the submarines resting upright on the seabed, their conning towers intact, the hulls scoured clean by current. Some looked almost new, except for the holes where demolition charges had torn them open. Even in death, they seemed disciplined, lined up along the bottom as if saluting something unseen. Historians called it haunting. The ocean called it normal. For the families of the missing, the years stretched thin. There were no bodies to bury, no letters returned. The post-war government printed lists of the lost, name after name, boat after boat. In some coastal towns, the entire generation of young men had vanished. The widows wore black, the children learned to live with silence. Memorials went up with simple inscriptions. They went to sea and did not return. By the 1950s, the first rumors began. Sailors in South America claimed to have seen German submarines landing at remote coves. In Argentina, an old farmer told of hearing engines offshore in 1945, long after the war had ended. The stories spread like mist U-boats carrying gold, or fugitives, or secret weapons bound for some hidden colony in the south. Newspapers printed them between stories of rationing and reconstruction. No proof ever came, but no one stopped believing. People wanted mystery more than closure. In truth, the mystery was simpler and darker. Most of the missing boats had gone down quietly, crushed by pressure or struck by depth charges whose explosions never reached the surface. Some had sunk so deep that their steel turned brittle, their shape half swallowed by mud. The Atlantic floor became a geography of forgotten coordinates. Sailors' charts were full of empty spaces, labeled only with the word Verloren, lost. When sonar technology matured in the 1960s, oceanographers began to rediscover what the war had hidden. Each new survey brought back strange outlines, tubes of shadow lying along the seabed, half buried, sometimes stacked like fallen logs. The scientists gave them numbers, the veterans gave them names. Every rediscovery reopened wounds. A British research team found one wreck at a depth of 270 meters, still sealed. They lowered cameras through a small opening. The footage showed boots scattered across the floor, a mug still resting beside a folded blanket, a rusted harmonica. The men who watched the video said nothing for a long time. One of them, an engineer, later said he could feel the weight of the water pressing on his chest, even in the lab. In Germany, the conversation about the U-boats slowly changed. At first, they were a symbol of defeat, then of guilt, and finally of endurance. Museums began to collect artifacts, periscopes, uniforms, fragments of hull plating. School children climbed through preserved submarines, marveling at how small they were. The guides spoke not of glory, but of confinement, of how courage and fear can share the same narrow corridor. By the 1980s, divers were visiting the wrecks as sacred sites. They went down in pairs, descending through the dark with flashlights and flowers. Each dive was an act of remembrance, a conversation with the sea. They did not take souvenirs. To disturb the dead was considered bad luck, even by men who did not believe in luck. Some of those divers began to hear strange noises on their headsets' metallic taps, rhythmic echoes that did not match any known marine pattern. At first they thought it was interference, but the sounds came only near the wrecks. Always the same pattern, always fading when they rose toward the surface. They recorded them, played them for scientists, who explained them away as sonar anomalies. The divers smiled and nodded, but privately they called it the Morse of the Deep. In 1991, a French team exploring near the Bay of Biscay found 3 submarines lying close together, all facing east. It seemed impossible. The records listed them as lost months apart, in different battles. Yet there they were, side by side, like brothers who had decided to die together. Their propellers were clean, free of coral, as if the sea had polished them. The divers left plaques inscribed with the words, Heimkehr Homecoming, and rose back into the light. The myth of the Ghost Fleet began there. Writers picked up the story, television crews made documentaries, and the idea of a lost armada sleeping beneath the Atlantic entered popular imagination. It was romantic, tragic, cinematic. It was also real enough to matter. The war had been over for half a century, but the sea had not finished telling its part. In the early 2000s, governments began mapping the ocean floor in detail. Digital sonar produced images so sharp that the wrecks looked sculpted. Each dive revealed a new story. Some submarines lay split open, torpedoes still inside. Others were so perfectly preserved that serial numbers were visible on the hulls. Engineers stared at the screens in disbelief. The Atlantic had frozen history in place. Today, when you look at those maps, you can trace the war like a constellation of ghosts stretching from Norway to the Caribbean. Each point marks a place where time stopped. Each line between them is an unspoken sentence. The ocean does not forget grammar, it simply rewrites it in currents and pressure. The sea teaches slowly, every discovery brings awe and unease. Some researchers speak of feeling watched through their submersible's glass domes, as though the wrecks themselves were aware. It is not fear they describe, but recognition, the strange sense that history is staring back. There is no need to invent legends. The truth is legend enough, hundreds of men sealed in darkness, dreaming of home until the sea claimed them. The ghost fleet sleeps in perfect order, row upon row, patient as the tide. Above them, ships pass, satellites map the waves, storms rise and vanish. But down there, nothing moves quickly. The war ended, the world changed, and still the Atlantic holds its breath. By the 21st century, the war seemed like ancient history. The veterans were gone, the bunkers had become museums, and the concrete pens at Lorient and Saint-Nazaire stood as hollow reminders of something no one could quite understand anymore. But the Atlantic had not forgotten. The sea, which never grows old, still held its vigil. And sometimes, late at night, when the waves were calm and the sonar screens blank, it whispered. The first of those whispers came as sound. In 2003, a NATO training exercise picked up a signal in the North Atlantic that no one could identify. It was faint, metallic, and rhythmic 3 taps, then silence, then 3 again. Submarine captains have a superstition about patterns. If you hear one, it's human. But there were no submarines in that sector, no ships, no storms, nothing. The signal repeated for 40 minutes, then vanished. The technicians logged it and moved on. The ocean, as always, said nothing. 2 years later, an oceanographic survey vessel detected a similar pulse in roughly the same location. The data looked almost identical, as if something was calling from the deep, waiting for an answer. The frequency was traced to a depth of over 2,000 meters too deep for any operational submarine. When they sent a remotely operated camera down, the feed went black halfway. The engineers blamed equipment failure. One diver, a veteran named Reinhardt, whispered, "The fleet still patrols." Such stories are dismissed by scientists, but they travel quickly through sailors' bars and research vessels. Every oceanographer eventually hears about the phantom fleet, about the idea that something still moves under the water, following old routes. Whether it's sound reflecting from canyons or the ghostly afterimage of sonar signals, the myth persists because it feels earned. The sea does not lie, it just speaks a language we cannot translate. Modern divers visit the wrecks with new tools and old reverence. They descend in silence, light slicing through the black, revealing shapes that the world forgot. The submarines rest like sleeping animals, coated in silt, their names half-eaten by corrosion. Inside, the compartments are intact, bunks still folded, instruments rusted but recognizable. Even the pencils near the navigation charts have not moved. The cold preserves everything except the men. When explorers enter those spaces, time fractures. They breathe through their regulators and listen to the hiss of air, the only sound in a world built for silence. Some describe a sense of companionship, as if the walls themselves were aware of being seen again. It's not mysticism, it's empathy. To look at those remains is to look directly into fear, courage, and futility all at once. The technology that reveals these wrecks also strips away the mystery. High-resolution sonar now maps entire oceans, turning graves into data. Every new wreck discovered becomes a point of interest, a digital model, a video shared online. But the more we see, the less we feel. The ocean resists that. Cameras cannot record its weight, its patience. The sea teaches humility by drowning arrogance. In Germany, the legacy of the U-boats has softened into elegy. Documentaries no longer speak of valor or victory. They speak of exhaustion, of men who became instruments of policy and paid with their breath. School children visit the U-995 in Labo and walk its narrow corridor in stunned silence. The metal smells of rust and memory. They cannot imagine 50 men living there, laughing, arguing, dying in that space. They emerge blinking into sunlight and realize that the war is not gone. It is simply quiet now. In Britain and the United States, the wrecks have become objects of fascination. television crews follow divers down to the lost wolves of the Atlantic, filming the eerie calm of the seabed. Narrators whisper about the ghosts that still sleep there. The audience watches, hypnotized by beauty and horror intertwined. It is not the destruction that captivates them, but the stillness that follows it. Peace, in its truest form, is unsettling. Every few years, a new wreck is found that challenges the records. A submarine lying thousands of kilometers from where it was believed to have sunk. Sometimes the logs show that it was supposed to have surrendered, not died. Each discovery reopens speculation. Did some captains refuse to surrender, choosing the deep instead? Were there secret orders, unknown missions, final journeys that never ended? The answers dissolve into silt. Historians dig through archives, comparing codes, messages, fragments of letters. They find contradictions and coincidences. A radioman's diary recovered from a wreck reads, "We will not give ourselves to them. The sea knows us." The next line is smeared by water, unreadable. That sentence alone has been quoted in countless books. A quiet defiance turned into poetry. To the ocean, defiance means nothing. It accepts everything. It took the pride of empires and the lives of boys. It turned machinery into coral and fear into sediment. Every wreck becomes part of a slow ritual, the transformation of history into geology. The ocean's mercy is that it forgets nothing but remembers without pain. Diving technology keeps improving. Autonomous drones glide where humans cannot, mapping the abyss with precision. Their cameras record miles of silence. Occasionally they pass too close to a wreck, stirring up silt. The water turns opaque, and when it clears, the wreck seems to have changed position. Data anomalies, the engineers say, but they watch the footage twice anyway. In one mission off the coast of Iceland, a drone discovered a U-boat half buried in volcanic sand. Its hull was marked with long scratches, as if dragged by the current for decades, yet its periscope was still extended, aimed toward the surface. When the video feed surfaced, an old submariner watching the broadcast muttered, "She's still looking home." The sea contains more than ships. It contains echoes. Sound travels farther underwater than in air, bending through layers of temperature and density. Some sonar operators claim they can still hear patterns too structured to be natural faint Morse signals that match wartime frequencies. Every few years, these claims appear in naval forums, quickly dismissed, then remembered again. The last generation that truly feared the U-boats is almost gone, yet their shapes linger on radar, their ghosts embedded in technology. What makes these stories endure is not superstition, but recognition. Humanity built these machines to master the sea. The sea accepted them and made them part of itself. We listen for echoes because we cannot stand the idea of silence so complete that it forgets us. The Atlantic offers a compromise. It keeps our memory, but in its own language. At night, sailors on modern freighters sometimes see strange ripples crossing calm water, patterns too regular for wind. They appear briefly, then dissolve. No instruments detect anything. The crew writes it off as fatigue. But a few, usually the older ones, whisper to each other, "They're still down there." The ocean remains unbothered by myth. It rolls, it consumes, it forgives nothing. The wrecks rest beneath it, their decks carpeted with silt, their brass instruments dulled to the color of bone. Each one carries the same inscription, carved by time. We were here. We are still here. The ocean does not remember the way people do. It does not keep names or dates. It keeps shapes, weights, temperatures, the slow pulse of pressure. When we speak of wrecks as sleeping, it is only because sleep is the closest word we have for stillness that lasts forever. The Atlantic holds that stillness, folding it into current and tide until the difference between motion and rest disappears. By the time the new century began, humanity had mapped almost every coastline, yet understood almost nothing of the deep. Satellites traced surface color and wave height, but the true body of the sea remained hidden. That invisibility became its power. It was where history could hide without consequence. In the ocean, guilt rusts as easily as steel. Researchers who study the wrecks have learned to speak quietly. The more they describe, the less certain their words become. They begin with measurements and end with metaphors. One British oceanographer, after spending 6 months scanning the Bay of Biscay, said, "We are not explorers anymore. We are caretakers of ghosts." She was not being poetic, she was exhausted. Every sonar trace she examined showed evidence of violence that had once been immediate and is now geological. The transformation from war to landscape is what the sea does best. For divers, contact with the wrecks is a negotiation with fear. They descend through layers of water colder than ice, knowing that a single equipment failure could end them. The light narrows to a beam, and then even that fades. At such depth, sound becomes intimate. The crack of a distant rockfall can feel like breath on the neck. Then the hull appears, rising from the darkness like architecture, too large and too deliberate to be natural. The divers hover before it, feeling the ancient pull between curiosity and respect. It is like visiting a cathedral where the gods have drowned. They sometimes bring offerings, a small plaque, a flag, a flower weighted with lead. They leave them near the hatches and ascend without speaking. The act is private, almost instinctive. No one asks why. The sea accepts the gesture without reply. Modern machines do what people no longer can. Autonomous vehicles sweep the depths with lasers and sonar, building digital monuments out of pixels. Museums display the results, virtual reconstructions of boats that have not seen daylight in 80 years. Visitors can walk through holograms of rusted corridors, peer into simulated torpedo rooms, touch screens that explain how the war was fought and lost. The experience feels complete until the last screen fades to blue, and then the silence returns. It is the same silence that fills the real ocean. The absence of witness. That silence has weight. Every time a diver's hand brushes a railing, the metal flakes away like ash. Every vibration disturbs the equilibrium the sea has built. Historians argue about whether preservation is respect or interference. The dead, of course, have no opinion. The sea makes the decision for them. It takes everything apart and then rebuilds it according to its own logic. Coral grows along periscopes. Anemones bloom inside control panels. Life replaces life. Not all who visit the wrecks are scientists. Some are descendants of the lost crews. They come in chartered boats, reading lists of coordinates, whispering names. A woman once stood on the deck of a research vessel above the site of U-398 where her grandfather had disappeared. The crew recorded her reading his last letter aloud. The words were ordinary: weather, love, food. Halfway through, her voice broke. The wind carried the paper out of her hand and into the water. The ocean accepted that too. The further we move from the war, the more these gestures matter. Technology can resurrect detail, but not meaning. Meaning is fragile. It exists only when someone feels it. The men who built the submarines believed they were writing the future in iron. The ocean rewrote it in silence. Now it is the silence that endures. Some philosophers have suggested that the sea functions as memory for the planet, a place where all noise eventually dissolves into pattern. Every shipwreck, every lost city, every drowned voice adds another layer to the archive. The U-boats are simply one chapter in that endless text. To read it is impossible. To listen is enough. At night, on research vessels drifting above the ghost fleet, crew members often gather on deck after the work is done. They smoke, they tell stories, they stare into the dark water. Beneath them, 2 miles down, the submarines rest. Sometimes someone throws a coin into the sea, an old habit inherited from sailors who believed payment was due for safe passage. The coin vanishes before it touches light. No one speaks. The sea doesn't bargain, but it understands ritual. In recent years, a few countries have tried to protect these wrecks legally, declaring them war graves. The paperwork is bureaucratic and dull: coordinates, tonnage, crew lists. But behind each line is a heartbeat that once existed. When a government official signs the declaration, they are unknowingly adding another name to the ocean's ledger. The water does not care about signatures, but it keeps the record. When storms roll across the Atlantic, the waves drag at the deep. Sediment shifts, uncovering fragments of hull or glass. Sometimes a piece breaks free and rises slowly through the currents, a valve, a boot, a bone. Most never reach the surface. Those that do are discovered on beaches by children who have no idea what they are holding. The sea offers reminders at random, as if testing whether we still remember how to wonder. There is a moment, when the wind drops and the horizon blurs, that the ocean looks exactly as it did in 1945. The same light, the same smell of salt and distance. Standing there, it is easy to believe the past still exists somewhere just beyond sight. Perhaps it does. Sound travels farther underwater than any memory on land. A single echo can circle the globe for years before fading. Somewhere in that endless resonance, the war continues quietly, not in violence, but in vibration. Every generation finds new ways to record itself. The U-boats recorded their generation in metal and pressure. The sea kept the recording. We who listen now hear only fragments. 3 pings, then silence, then 3 again. The rhythm remains. The meaning, like the ocean, is deep enough to drown in. By the time the last submariner died, the fleet he once served had already become a myth. No one alive remembered the exact smell of diesel in a flooded hull or the peculiar sound of depth charges bursting above. What remained was film, static, and stories told by children of men who rarely spoke. Yet the ocean held the truth beneath all of that, preserved not in words but in pressure. The modern world sails above the ghosts without noticing them. Cargo ships slide along the same routes the convoys once took. Tourists fly overhead, watching the blue vastness from airplane windows. The Atlantic is still a highway of nations, but under its surface, the wrecks lie like punctuation marks in a forgotten language. In 2010, a group of filmmakers from Hamburg set out to capture what they called the sound of the past. They fitted hydrophones to a deep-sea drone and lowered it near the coordinates of a known wreck. The recordings were uneventful, the hum of currents, the clicks of crustaceans. Then, an hour into the dive, a pattern appeared. 6 seconds of metallic resonance, perfectly even, like breathing. The team replayed it 100 times. It was not machinery. It was not echo. It was simply there. When the sound engineer described it later, he said, it was the ocean exhaling. The documentary they produced was quiet, almost reverent. There were no narrators, only images of waves and shadows, and the muffled rhythm that seemed to come from the deep. Viewers called it haunting, beautiful, meaningless. That mixture was exactly right. Meaning, when it comes from the ocean, is always partial. Museums display fragments of the U-boats behind glass. A control lever, a coffee cup, a corroded logbook. Visitors peer at them through reflections of their own faces. The objects are mute, but the air around them carries tension. Children ask why anyone would live inside something so small. Their parents don't answer. The question is too large. For survivors' families, these relics are anchors in time. A man might touch the railing of a preserved submarine and imagine his father's hand there decades before. The gesture connects 2 lives separated by silence. He cannot reclaim what the sea took, but for a moment he can feel the distance close. Memory is like that. It does not restore, it bridges. Oceanographers continue to map the wrecks with increasing precision. The digital atlases are astonishing fields of metal bones spread across the sea floor, each labeled with numbers, dates, coordinates. They look like constellations inverted, stars that fell into the water and stayed there. When viewed as a whole, they trace a pattern of extinction. Technology, in trying to understand, ends up drawing an epitaph. A few of the wrecks have collapsed completely. The sea has no hurry, it dismantles everything gently. Plates peel away like paper, engines crumble into fine rust. The deeper ones, sealed in cold, endure longer. A diver once said that touching one was like touching time itself, brittle and patient. It felt alive. The more the ocean gives back, the more it reminds us of what it refuses to return. The U-boats are history now, but they are also mirrors. Their story is not about nations or battles, it is about the persistence of the human voice. Every submarine was a sentence spoken into darkness, ending in silence. The sea kept the silence. Sometimes modern vessels crossing the same coordinates experience odd interference radar static, unexplained noise on communication lines. The crew laughs it off, but someone always glances at the chart. There's comfort in superstition. If the sea still talks, then the past is not entirely gone. In Kiel, a memorial stands facing the Baltic, inscribed with a simple phrase, "Sie blieben auf See." They remained at sea. Beneath those words lies the collective breath of thousands who never surfaced. Each year, fewer people attend the ceremony. The sea, indifferent, continues its slow applause against the shore. Art has tried to answer where history cannot. Painters depict the submarines as bones of whales. Poets describe the Atlantic as a mind that dreams. One sculptor cast a bronze hand emerging from the water, palm upward, to symbolize both surrender and remembrance. During storms, waves break across it, filling the fingers with foam. The gesture looks like prayer, or maybe like the ocean reminding us that it too reaches out. Scientists have their own language for reverence. They call the U-boat graveyard a dynamic ecosystem, a term that sounds clean, detached. Yet when they describe what they see, their precision fails. The biologist who first documented coral growing along a rusted hatch wrote in his report, "It looks like forgiveness." As years pass, the distinction between technology and theology blurs. We use machines to stare into mysteries once reserved for gods. The deeper we look, the more the sea gives us silence in return. That silence is not absence, it is containment. The wrecks are not gone, they are absorbed, their stories diffused through water molecules, traveling with every wave. To drink from the ocean is, in a way, to drink from history. There are moments when the surface itself betrays a flicker of remembrance. In certain light, in certain calm, the water above the ghost fleet changes color, not by much. Just enough to make observers pause. The sailors call it steel light. It lasts seconds, a shimmer like breath under glass. No one photographs it successfully. The sea allows no proof. Humanity continues to build machines that will one day rest beside the old ones. Every ship we launch is a promise and a repetition. The U-boats were not the first to vanish beneath these waves, nor will they be the last. What endures is not the vessel, but the gesture. The reaching forward into uncertainty, the belief that we can master the deep. The sea smiles at that belief and waits. When storms scatter the Atlantic into mountains of water, somewhere below them the ghost fleet rocks gently, unchanged. The pressure there is absolute, the dark eternal. Yet within that darkness, history glows faintly, like a dying ember that refuses to go out. It glows because we still look for it. We call it remembrance. The sea calls it routine. Morning light touches the Atlantic, and for a moment everything looks new. The same sun that burned on the periscopes of 1942 glints again across the waves. No trace of wreckage, no sign of graves, only motion. The sea begins each day as if nothing has ever happened to it. That, perhaps, is its most human quality, the ability to go on pretending. Beneath the surface, the silence remains perfect. Silt drifts across the decks of the sunken fleet. Small fish weave through open hatches. A periscope tilts with the current like a reed. Inside the wrecks, the air is gone. The metal is thin as paper. Yet the shape of purpose lingers. Even stripped of identity, the U-boats still look built for intention, as if waiting for someone to return and explain the mission. No one will. The generations that sent them have vanished, and the ones that followed learned to fear the sea for other reasons. But the presence below is constant. It hums through sonar, through the songs of whales, through the stories sailors tell when the weather turns and the deck tilts underfoot. They never say the word ghost, they say history. History is the name we give to everything that will not stay buried. Sometimes, when a storm passes and the water calms, a diver can see further than usual. The light reaches just enough to catch a glint of brass or a line of rivets in the dark. That glint has traveled 70 years to be seen again. It is not message or omen. It is coincidence raised to poetry. The ocean specializes in that. It creates beauty out of indifference. There are stories, always stories of strange noises on research recordings. of radio signals repeating old call signs, of compasses spinning above the coordinates where the fleet sleeps. Scientists trace them to magnetic anomalies, to pressure shifts. The explanation never quite matters. The point is that people still listen. Every myth begins as an act of attention. We listen, and in listening we confess that we still need the dead to answer. On land, time moves differently. Museums fade, memorials crack, the edges of memory soften. Schoolbooks reduce the Atlantic campaign to maps and numbers. But when visitors stand before the photographs of those who went to sea, they fall silent. Silence is the truest translation of the ocean. It does not erase, it compresses. Every word ever spoken aboard those boats still exists somewhere, folded into the pressure of the deep. The technology of memory improves. Satellites render the surface of the Earth in endless resolution. Drones roam trenches where light has never reached. Each new image is sharper, each new map more precise, yet the understanding remains the same. We have charted everything except ourselves. The U-boats are still down there, not as reminders of war, but as mirrors of ambition. The human urge to descend, to discover, to command, to vanish. When explorers lower cameras now, they do so with care. The footage shows not only the wrecks, but the marine life that curls around them, small galaxies of color orbiting rust. The voice of the narrator, recorded later, always falters at the same point. The realization that this quiet place is both grave and nursery. Out of destruction came shelter. The ocean is pragmatic that way. It wastes nothing, not even tragedy. Somewhere off the coast of Ireland, a research buoy transmits constant data. Temperature, salinity, current speed. The sensors hang directly above the site of a wreck once known as U385. The numbers stream to a server in real time, impersonal and endless. Every fluctuation is stored in archives, waiting for someone to find pattern. If you could translate that pattern into sound, it would be the same slow rhythm that sonar men heard in the war, a heartbeat through water. There is no final revelation in the deep, only continuity. The steel will dissolve, the coral will bloom, and eventually the marks of men will vanish completely. But before that happens, there will always be someone leaning over the railing of a ship, staring down, feeling the weight of invisible history. The sea gives back nothing tangible, yet everyone who looks into it feels return. At dusk, the Atlantic glows slate and gold. The wind shifts, and the waves align into long rows, as orderly as a fleet. For a few minutes, they look almost like ships advancing. Then the light changes and the illusion dissolves. The ocean laughs softly against the hull. It has rehearsed this trick for centuries. In the end, nothing is truly lost. The metal becomes mineral, the bones become salt, the names become currents whispered by tides. Memory is not what survives, it is what moves. The war is over, but its motion remains. It travels through the same water that now carries our cargo, our data, our reflections. We are all passengers on the surface of a story that continues beneath. At night, when the sea turns black and the sky is scattered with cold stars, it is easy to imagine that the Atlantic itself is breathing. The waves rise, the waves fall, and somewhere below the ghost fleet answers with its own slow pulse. The living and the dead share that rhythm. It is the sound of existence unending, the heartbeat of a world that refuses to stop remembering. The sea forgives nothing. The sea forgets nothing. The sea keeps everything, and in keeping it, becomes everything. And so the story of the lost U-boats ends where it began, beneath the surface, in darkness, in silence, in the endless depth that never ends.